Okay. Hello, and welcome to Wonkette Weekend Live Chat. I am Robin Panacchia, and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson. Um,
Hello, Robin. So
Hello.
let's hop into this while my wife is still listening. Um, and so I think everyone has either seen or heard about the vicious police beating. Um, we can perhaps legally say at a certain point murder of Tyre Nichols. Um, uh, I watched the whole thing. I know other people have legitimate reasons for not being able to, but I watched the entire thing. It's an old-fashioned lynching. It does not particularly matter that the police officers involved were black. They are part of a system of brutality by the police towards black people. And the system, vegans can work at a slaughterhouse, and it does not make the slaughterhouse no less a slaughterhouse. It is just you're part of the system. And that's
Mhm.
been a big part of the debate. We can get into that. I think I want to I know CNN has something about what we know so far, and I'm just going to read some of this. So on January 7th, so a few weeks ago, around 8:30 p.m., Memphis officers pulled over Nichols' car for suspected reckless driving, according to a statement from the police, which you should definitely trust. It is sort of like if the media had run with O.J. Simpson's statement that after a pleasant conversation with his wife, she killed over from natural causes, and the end. But the police often give these really sort of self-serving statements. This was no exception, using terms like a confrontation occurred between officers and the vehicle's driver, which was later identified as Nichols. He then fled on foot, according to Memphis police. In the video, he does run. That is a normal human response when people are killing you, I think, is to get away from the people who are killing you. He was at one point just a few blocks away from his home before he died. Not died, he died 3 days later, but before they captured him. And so what was interesting is the police chief, Sarah Lynn C.J. Davis, told CNN's Don Lemon on Friday, uh, we've looked at cameras, we've looked at body worn cameras, even if something occurred prior to the stop. We've been unable to substantiate that at this time. We've taken a pretty extensive look to determine what the probable cause was for the stop, and we have not been able to substantiate that. It doesn't mean that something didn't happen, but there's no proof, of course, in sort of
Yeah,
our
no, nothing has been
American
substantiated
justice.
yet.
If you don't have
They've
proof of
got nothing.
something, you should not have. But Robin, you wrote about this yesterday. I mean, the history of the traffic stops. I mean, they range from a generalized shakedown, a way to raise money, and this goes,
Yeah.
and that's been a key. It
So
was a
police
key in
are tax
Ferguson and others.
collectors. They're, like traffic patrollers. They are, law enforcement officers. They're doing all of these jobs that we don't necessarily need police to be doing. Maybe we can find another way to raise taxes, like taxing billionaires
Well, I
or
mean, it's
rich
a
people in
shakedown,
general. Like,
but that's the best case scenario. So the other is an escalation. So it's a way of getting around constitutional rights of search and seizure. You
mhm,
stop someone and find some reason to then search their vehicle, and then you find either drugs or whatever. Often the brutality is part of it, but brutality is often
mhm.
ancillary to the ideal of finding some reason to throw these people in jail or get them for something else.
Oh yeah,
And even if you get them in jail, I mean, that is part of the tough on crime stuff. So you can't, necessarily pull that aside whenever politicians, and we get in trouble for calling Democrats out on this, but Democrats and Republicans alike, whenever they talk about funding, more cops, making the streets safer, this is generally what happens. The lowest hanging
Yeah.
fruit is to find whatever reason it is to lock up a lot of people, often at the lowest. It's the easiest thing to do, and that's sort of what we've seen here.
Because they're not actual, like, as you've seen, statistically, police are only solving about 2% of all violent crimes. Like that is where they're at. And they're spending about 90% of their time doing these traffic stops that, in England, they don't even have, like, these are separate things. Like, there are traffic patrollers who are not armed, and then there are law enforcement officers who are. We don't really need police to be doing traffic stops. I don't think that we need police in general, because I think that we can fulfill, like, we can break up what police do and have other people doing it, and do it in a better, more efficient, and more successful way. The police are not investigating crimes. The majority of the time, they're not breaking up, violent situations. That actually is a fairly rare occurrence. They usually come after the fact. And they're not actually keeping us safe, is the thing. And in fact, usually they're making things less safe, like when they, brutally murder a kid who was just driving home.
And again, this has been the debate since, Tyre Nichols will be, I've made this argument before, that there's sort of the rotating Black hashtag, and it's eventually is
Mhm.
coming for you if you're a Black man. So when am I going to be the hashtag? When am I going to be the mural in a gentrifying white neighborhood? Because
Mhm.
that's what happens. And there's some, nice statements from politicians, and oh my God, how could this happen? And some sort of more clueless statements from often a white folks saying, this isn't America I grew up in, because,
It
you know,
literally
uh,
is.
well, the history that would teach them that is either being banned or they're ignoring it. But um, this is, Nichols will be the new hashtag. He sort of grabbed the baton from George Floyd, but you can't ignore what little occurred since Floyd's murder, when any efforts at reform were eliminated, and you wind up having the same discussion, similar to like the school shootings, um, which then become
Oh, we ended
discussions
up
about door
funding the
control.
police more.
Oh yes, because the police, unlike with school shootings, the police are very good at um, linking safety. Our safety American safety, specifically white people, comes from containing Black people. And
Mhm.
I'd reviewed the Hulu documentary, the 1619 Project, and I think it's telling that Republicans, even white historians, regardless of political affiliation, specifically resent how she has linked um, modern policing with the slave patrols. The common
Mhm.
response is, well, there's police in England, and well before even slavery existed there. But the concept of containing this group that will potentially be a threat, um, and how that is involved everyone. So there used to be slave overseers who were actually enslaved people. That didn't mean that they gave coffee breaks to the slaves. Their job was to maintain the system. So something I want to read from a New Yorker article about the invention of the police that ran in 2020, shortly after George Floyd's murder. In 18th century New York, a person held as a slave could not gather in a group of more than three, could not ride a horse, and could not hold a funeral at night, could not be out at an hour after sunset without a lantern, and could not sell Indian corn, peaches, or any other fruit in any street or market in the city. And the writer says it's linking it to stop and frisk, stop and whip, shoot to kill. Um, the fear of Black people, Black men in specific, Black people being gathered in any space, in the sense of how that's linked to violent crime. If you want to prove that violent crime is under control, it is that you've contained these neighborhoods, and that includes some very seemingly liberal spaces. So New York
Mhm.
City, San Francisco, Portland, the debate often comes to how do we contain this? We need the police to do it. And the police say the only way we can do this is through this violence, is through
Yeah.
this oppression. And when very well meaning liberals uh, will come forward and say, "Oh, here's all these things we can do. We can relieve your burden. We can not have traffic stops. We can, because that's very dangerous, as you documented yesterday." That's not what they want. The police sort of want to be able to continue
Yeah.
the system. They believe that that is the only way to maintain order. That is the training. That is the problem. And so we just keep. It is sort of a, to me, Looney Tunes, because when President Biden spoke on this, it's just like we need to fund the police more to have safer communities, directly linking a highly militarized police presence with safety in those communities when that's not the case. If you actually go to those
Mhm.
communities, they don't want people I mean, they are victims of crime. They want crime, but the current system doesn't work. It's just like if all your teachers were pedophiles, and I was like, we need to sort of burn down whatever the system is and get rid of the pedophiles and come in with regular teachers. Doesn't mean that I don't want my kids educated, but
Yeah.
I think with the police, they've said you either have this system or nothing. And I think they've even gone so far as to sort of actively sabotage progressive prosecutors who
Oh,
try
absolutely.
to,
Like yeah. They did it in San Francisco. It was proven. They're doing it in other places. Like they're just being like, okay, we're not going to do our jobs. We're not going to bring you cases. We're not going to let you do your job because we want people to think that the city is less safe with you in charge because we want a prosecutor who's going to, throw people in jail because, I mean, frankly, in America, that's how we've been brainwashed to believe like that's how you keep people safe. That's how you maintain order. Um, I'm half surprised that a lot of people aren't looking at Singapore and going like, now that's how things should be. We should beat people more in public. Um, and a lot of people do not want to even question this. They don't want to question if it's actually effective because it feels, in a way, it's cathartic. They're like, if we're really horrible to people, if we're really tough on them, if we, just check for crime everywhere and constantly haunt people, um, then people won't do any crime. And that is absolute bullshit. Like
and
there's no qualifying it. It's not factually true. It feels true to people, but it's not factually true.
I lived in New York during the Giuliani administration, and I obviously, it wasn't like I was socializing with, you know, Donald Trump and MAGA, or proto MAGA types. This is like your cocktail parties of Condé Nast people, often, um, you've used the term girl boss, but like essentially feminist presenting folks who,
Mhm.
but they love Giuliani. They were the narrative was Giuliani came and saved the city, and broken windows policing works. This is great because for their perspective, there was no crime in their neighborhoods. They were not the victims of, nothing changed in how the police interacted with them. It was
Mhm.
more, you would just go to these particularly predominantly POC neighborhoods, poorer neighborhoods, and that's where the impact of Giuliani's policies were most keenly felt. But again, people who presented as liberal loved it, welcomed it. I mean, that's the history of fascism, of course, which is just,
Mhm.
I want to be able to enjoy my stuff, and poor people are, and seemingly the criminals are making it bad for me to be able to enjoy my stuff and walk down neighborhoods. God forbid that any of this is a reflection of income inequality. It is more of just make those people go away. And when you had in LA, right, it was Katy Perry and Gwyneth Paltrow and these ladies who were supporting
Hmm.
um, the proto-Trump candidate because he was going to fix crime, and it it is not like Karen Bass had no plan to fix crime. It wasn't like she was like,
Hmm.
I'm all pro crime, pro nice white ladies like Katy Perry getting beaten on the streets. No, she was like, it's a complicated
Yeah,
issue.
it's
Here's
Rick
what we're going to
Caruso.
do.
Sorry.
Um,
What's the guy's name?
yeah. So, it was not a, it was sort of not surprising. This is kind of what happened. So we can't sort of disconnect that issue because tough on crime is tough on a specific group of people who don't
Hmm.
necessarily have a lot of power to push back against that. And both political parties run on tough on crime. And
Hmm.
that's wind up always here. This is kind of the victims, sort of the collateral damage of what's considered tough on crime.
Quite frankly, and I wouldn't say this under normal circumstances, and I, you know, get very tired of people claiming that I am down on Democrats when I'm not. But I kind of hold Democrats more responsible in a certain way as far as this is concerned, because they actually kind of should know better if they don't know better. And I feel like there are a lot of them who do know better and are aware that these things are not helpful because the freaking studies are everywhere and have been since forever. And they're like, okay, no, this actually would work, but people won't like it. They like tough on crime. That's what they want to hear. So that's what we're going to give them. And if you discuss doing other things, then that will ruin our electoral, like our ability to win elections. So I kind of, it bothers me a little bit
Republicans,
more. Like
yeah,
Republicans, I think genuinely are stupid enough to believe that, this is good for them at least.
I wouldn't
I,
frame it as even stupidity. I think Republicans openly cater to the people
yeah.
who put them in office. So
Oh, yeah.
there is
They
no
want it to be bad.
there is no one, and people sometimes use the argument that there's like, you know, uh, rural Alabamans or something, white Alabamans who are voting against their self-interest. I don't think so. I
They
think
are voting for their
generally speaking,
self-interest.
yeah, generally speaking, Republicans give their supporters everything that they want.
Hmm.
They look out for them to the point where the reality is that 2 years after an attempted coup, when they said, look, and despite an attempted coup, but when they said, look, Democrats stole this election, okay, because too many black people were voting, we will fix this. They passed laws
Hmm.
in Republican led states on party line votes to restrict the votes for minorities. Even though Christian Cinema said, well, we still had free and fair elections afterward, which was not true. Essentially, a poll tax was put on a lot of black people who,
Hmm.
you went from being able to, after work, drop off your ballot to now going either doing work or doing your one day off, which is not actually a free or fair concept, Miss Cinema. But anyway, that is clearly they delivered. Like, okay, you felt like you've
Yeah.
been cheated, we're giving it to you. 2 years after um, George Floyd, and look, yes,
I mean, and
Republicans
how
block
many
this
years
stuff. We
after
get that
Rodney
they
King?
block that
Really?
stuff.
Like,
Well, Nichols was born after
yeah.
those officers were acquitted. That's how in little time. And when people say I've never seen beatings like this, they did not watch the King video. I mean, King was very lucky to have survived that. I mean, it was not obviously as brutal, the damages, whatever, but it was also on tape. They found excuses to rationalize what had occurred
Mhm.
then. Um, and when you say that Republicans are blocking this, I feel like it's somewhat cuter because by half, because, well, in New York, it's clear that Democrats feel under the gun from tough on crime. It's like, this is why Hochul narrowly won. This is why we lost seats and potentially the House in New York, not because of our own sort of incompetence, but because of the perception of crime, and we need to be viewed as tougher on crime. And that's why I'm putting forward the, obviously the judge that Republicans like, because that
Mhm.
will be perceived as I'm going to be tough on crime. He's a former prosecutor, has the right
And I'm
record,
also
and
going to
so
be
forth.
tough on the left, which is also a thing that they think is sort of important. Like they want to be known as someone who stands up to the, extremes in their own party. Because, it's so incredibly extreme to think that we should do things to make it so people aren't regularly murdered by the police.
Yeah,
Uh,
but bottom line to me is that I said before, after when Democrats can kneel while wearing dashikis or whatever they want to, during this, and march and with Black Lives Matter, so that gets a little bit politically inconvenient. They can have the hashtags, but you have to like Tyre Nichols was someone who potentially probably voted for Biden or Harris. We don't know who voted, but
mhm.
I'm saying he was someone promised that we're going to look out for you, as Biden said, I have your back, Black people. I don't recall, Republicans have never promised anything to me. To the extent of there is
They've
no,
never promised us a rose garden.
well, I mean, the best analogy would be if they said, look, we're going to, protect you from illegal immigrants. They get elected, and instead they kind of fold and say, okay, well, actually, politically speaking, let's actually give more money to protect illegal immigrants, and an illegal immigrant actually kills someone. That would be politically ruinous for them. And they know it. They actually deliver on here's our harshest policies for illegal immigrants when we are in office.
Mhm.
They are very clear on that. So they can come up with excuses for what has occurred, but you've got to do something. And the idea that, oh, well, these guys were arrested and maybe if all goes well, they'll not be acquitted like Rodney King's uh, beaters were. And but nothing will fundamentally change. There's still just as much a chance that this person another Tyre Nichols could occur. And so
Yeah,
that's, to me, is
because we're talking
unacceptable.
about things that are done after the fact. And that doesn't really help because when people commit crimes, they're not thinking they're going to get caught. And especially when you have uh, police committing these crimes, they assume that they're going to be able to have a better time getting away with beating a kid like that to death than they are, some suburban kid. They know what they're doing is wrong. Like they're not, going around doing this to suburban white kids. They're not. They're just like doing it to people where they think they can get away with it. And that is pretty much how all crime happens to begin with. People aren't doing things they don't think they can get away with. Um, and the problem is that they think they can get away with it. And they're not being, they're being given too many opportunities to be allowed to do it. By taking, things away from them, by taking duties or whatever away from them, we limit the amount of harm that they are able to do. And hopefully get to the point uh, that we don't even have a police force as we recognize it now. Because
Well, yes, it's sort of, it all sort of links to the idea of not wanting to teach what is viewed as race essentialism. So the idea that there are sort of two different experiences. So we all know that white people tolerate the police as it exists, or okay with this as it exists, because they understand that they will not experience this treatment,
mhm,
that this sort of particularly Black neighborhoods, not even necessarily poor white neighborhoods, are patrolled quite this way, because it's almost similar to
yeah,
redlining. So essentially, what's a bad neighborhood? I grew up this way. They would, again, a seemingly white liberal Democrat voting Gloria Steinem sticker wearing person in New York I would know would be like, oh, that's a bad neighborhood. That's a sketchy area. Her code is that this is predominantly Black or Latino,
mhm,
and has nothing to do with poverty or actual crime rates. So like her artsy, neighborhood has just as much crime technically as
Mhm.
the poorer income, but it's been redlined. It's been viewed as bad people live here, and these people need to be contained. And so when you can't get through past that, um, but the it's just the rotating aspect of we will have this dialogue, and we will have the sense of how can we make life better for the police. Before I go further into that, this one gentleman had said that Matt Walsh, sort of the right wing troll, was holding up
Yes,
Singapore as a
he was.
great place to be emulated, but he's lying. We know this from during the COVID shutdowns, which to me was an example of, for one brief period, seeing white people having to live under
Hmm.
conditions that close to what black people were living in. And so they were being told, you cannot do you cannot do this. You can't leave, you here's the restrictions that you must live under. And they freaked out. They could not like wearing a mask to a grocery store,
Hmm.
going to a beach event. Oh, I can't go to the beach. I'm going to revolt and riot. They lasted, like, how long did that last, Robin? Like maybe a couple months before the
Oh
first
no,
freak out over.
I'm going to say a couple weeks, and I'm also going to say that the revolt started at exactly the point where they started talking about how masks were actually for other people, and when the statistics started coming out about how people of color were being more like being predominantly affected by the COVID. And as
Yeah.
soon as they heard that, they were like, actually, we're against this. Like,
Why should I be at all
yeah,
inconvenient?
why should I
Why
be
should
inconvenienced for other people? They
so
would never be able, they would not be able to live under that sort of scrutiny. They think everything is an infringement of their freedoms.
well,
Yeah,
yes,
no, they would
they
not.
what they want is an authoritarian society where
Yeah.
they're the in group and the out
Hmm.
group is has no rights. It in a weird way, they actually can enjoy themselves if they don't see people who have
Yeah.
no rights. A lot of their revolt against trans people, it doesn't impact them in any way. I mean, Matt Walsh himself has no kids, but he was going to some of these um, student student board meetings to protest because he just couldn't imagine people living in any way he did not
Yeah.
like. There has to be someone in that group. So, I think that's the challenge with the police, and it's one that is not. It is very difficult for Democrats to. If you look at how Republicans have waged war on school boards and teachers, there's no excusing teachers. I mean, and these are teachers are literally heroes, many of them protecting
Yeah.
students during but they are full on, they don't make qualifications. About the vast majority of teachers are really nice and great. DeSantis doesn't do this. These guys go straight toward teachers are indoctrinating your kids and don't want you to have any rights, and they're turning them queer and making them hate you because you're white. They don't make any qualification. And something I was writing about was on Bill Maher's show. Um, Tim Ryan, who had run for Senate, he used to be in the House of Representatives. He was talking about, oh, these cops are so overworked and stressed out. I watched the video. They didn't look very stressed. This is why I feel like every
Yeah.
politician, every white person needs to watch that video, Clockwork
Then why
Orange
do we
style.
need
They
them to
have
do
to.
everything? Like,
They're just
why do
overstressed.
they
We need
need
to
to
give
be
them more
performing all
money.
these services that they have no business performing?
Well, it was sort of like they they don't make enough money. They're overstressed. They're overworked. Oh, the poor cops. And it's like, what, I mean, a Waffle House waitress is overworked, overstressed, has no money, no health insurance, certainly can't just do this job for 20 years and then get a pension. She's stressed and she doesn't kill anybody. So,
Yeah.
and maybe if you don't do stress well, don't take this job. But there's no stress in these traffic stops. There's no stress in any of this. Um, just the gentleman who the DA, let me find his name, Mulroy, Steve Mulroy, um, said that the cops found Nichols again at another location. This is after he fled. And at that point, there's an amount of aggression that is unexplainable.
Yeah.
But it is explainable. Like anyone who knows the cops, like Chris Rock has a routine about this where if the cops have to run after you, they're going to
Hmm.
drag you back. Like they
Yeah.
hate any sort of perceived push against their authority or there is this. So the idea that he's saying this, and yes, he's a well-meaning guy. He's actually prosecuting, but the fact that he does not get the idea that cops freak the
That's
hell
how
out.
they get. And I don't mean to compare this to anything, but my experience with cops in protests has been absolutely freaking horrifying. I was, I had actual PTSD for a while. Like every time I saw a cop uniform, I was like completely at a loss. Like I just panicked. Because I did get the crap beaten out of me at a protest, and just their faces are just, they don't change. They're like these, like, it's like they look almost possessed. And I've seen that look on so many cop faces. And it's just this mode that they go into that, they are, they're power hungry. They know that they're the ones in charge, and they hate you. They hate you, and it's like they lose all of their humanity in their face, and that is what they are. That is how they get from doing that job or from training or what. But they shouldn't be doing it.
I think you and I have joked about this, Robin, that because cops that either of us have done studies on this or articles we've read the studies where cops make a crap load of money and overtime from policing
Oh
these
yeah.
protests to the point where, to me, I would happily be the guest of honor at a Stevens Robinson Sucks rally. I would just be there, have you throw stuff at me, and at the end you gave me a pile of money. I'd be like, that was awesome. Let me do this every weekend. I wouldn't actually get angry, but they really still hate it, even though it's like, one in Seattle over the protests, some of those cops were making more than the mayor.
Yeah.
At the course of the year. So they're making tons of money. So, and when Tim Ryan perpetuates this myth that cops are underpaid, they are not. Like, if the idea
They
is that
are
they're
paid so
underpaid,
much money.
if the idea is that they're underpaid compared to, you know, uh, Christopher Maloney, on who plays a cop, okay, fine. Yes, you do not make as much as a handsome TV cop. I'm sorry, but you do make more than pretty much any
I'm more of a
city
Richard Belzer
employee.
girl. Sorry.
Yes, I would have presumed that. And so a lot of, if I could also go back to something from one of the articles, I'm going to read here. In the first altercation shown in the video, multiple officers shout at Nichols to lie down, though he is already pinned to the ground from shoulders to feet. I am, he shouts back, desperate. During the second video, officers tell Nichols to give them his hands when an officer is already holding him by the wrist. Then the body camera points away. Officers also say in film that Nichols reached for their guns and is high, neither of which the videos show, though their first traffic stop was not included in the videos because it wasn't filmed. So we keep seeing this again and again. And so that's when they talk about for writing more blank checks to cops, when Biden talks about funding cops more and Harris and others, and any Democrat, that's their thing. How can we make things better? The one thing that Democrats love to say, and any well-meaning liberal, so this is progressive to, because I think of elected Democrats, it doesn't matter in certain ways. It's very rare to have anyone not say give cops more money, but training is the big thing. Training can help. Training can fix this because to me it
It's
reminds me
the whole
of
damn culture. There's
well
no
the training.
training. They're not being it's not like they think that these things are okay, because if they
Well,
did, they'd be like
Well, it's like, yeah, it's like the Buffy, the
It
line
could
where
just be in these circumstances.
Anya says, you're learning not to kill people. You're being trained
Yeah.
not to kill people. My point here from this though was that this is training. Like these are very
Hmm.
deliberate.
Yeah.
It's like how, you know, mobsters aren't naturally learning how to not directly order, like it's not intuitive to directly not order someone's death and to say things like, yeah, maybe you should take care of them or whatever, as if because if you're being recorded, you want to make it so that it's clearly not something that they can pin into you. That's something someone has taught you to do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of this stuff is like, this is the training. If you're
Mhm.
saying yelling at someone while holding their hands to show me your hands or do anything that would then justify the beat down you're putting on them, that is the training. And I feel like that's what either cops will deny, I'm sure, but we need to not be naive about this because this is not just sort of like an accidental thing or that these
Yeah.
five guys all accidentally went crazy and decided to just beat up a guy. Like this was all what they expected to happen and then they arranged it as in every other cover up of a beating of a someone in their custody.
Mhm. No, that is what they are, it's on some level what they think they're supposed to do. Um, there is no, like, that is the culture around policing. That is, how they think they're supposed to handle things. And, well, in those situations. Um, but
It's
they,
also somewhat of the
yeah,
gaslighting, right?
it's
Like
just, yeah.
of how how abusers treat women. So they did the studies of where, and this came up, not to go too far in the Amber Heard, Johnny Depp stuff, but like often abusers can sometimes be present as more rational than the abused person.
Oh,
So the
absolutely.
abused
Yeah.
person can be like, even someone well-meaning could be like, okay, well, when I saw the couple, this guy seemed nice, and when this lady was always freaking out and throwing stuff. So I don't know, maybe she's crazy, but actually, no. At home, he is torturing her, and so he's obviously, as someone who's torturing someone, kind of chill about it. But she is sort of obviously freaking out and acting out because that's a human response. And I think what I'm
Hmm.
going with this is that often,
And
every
abusers
time
also
a
often
normal,
know who to target,
yes, a
just
human
like police do.
response, yeah, a human response is viewed as either you're high, so just freaking out or being nervous because cops have approached you, like five officers late at night and are being intimidating and aggressive towards you. Like there was one video where they pulled over a woman, a black woman. She had her child with her. He was pointing a gun at her because she refused to
Mhm.
just pull over in the middle of the night. She waited till she got to a brightly
Yeah,
lit
which is
gas
what they
station.
tell you to do as a woman, like, just in general.
But
In your,
he had no part of that.
take
He
back
was
the night
freaking.
classes.
Yeah, he was like, "Why are you doing this?" He was freaking. But her response is sort of a normal response. So often, unless you get a literal drug test, you cannot really tell if someone is high. So what they're
Yeah.
usually interpreting this as is someone's often adrenaline fueled reaction to very angry, shouty guys approaching them at night
And
with
cops
guns.
are terrifying. Like, they're actually
Yeah.
scary. It's not like, like, it is a rational response to want to get the hell away, to freak out because of the way that they behave and the way that they act. And the fact that, they're armed. Like, these are people, and, people know that cops kill people. Of course, they're freaking scared for their lives. Like,
Yeah.
they have every
I
reason.
think
It's a rational fear.
once someone has tased you, so they're like, I think, and we'll see this later, people will focus on the fact that he ran. But once someone has beaten you, or in this case, tased you, like, it's sort of a human response, like, oh my God, like I'm dying. I need to run away. No one's going to be
Yeah.
like, I need to be a good.
I'm just going to stay here and take this beating like a good American citizen. Like,
Like at that point, it's just like I just want to survive this. You're not even thinking anymore about what might happen later or what charges. This is like I'm going to die, and so that's the response. And it was over something they perceived reckless driving, which this goes back. Which again, they don't teach this, uh,
Yeah.
but like back, this is Jim Crow set. Like you were pulled over often and terrorized if you were black for driving recklessly because that's very subjective, right?
Yeah.
And it's any pretense to either threaten you, control you, contain you, um, and that's just won't be confronted. That notion of what it is won't be confronted. It's very difficult. So it's sort of seen as this specific issue. But these guys were part of something called the Scorpion Unit,
Yeah.
which again, that if you're naming things after, like it's not the bunny unit or
It's not,
something, it's
it's
like
not the animal that you want to be naming police factions after if you're not trying to kill people.
yeah.
Like, that's clearly
Well,
the evil
yeah.
guys. Like the evil guys in a cartoon are the scorpion, whatever. I think that was actually the name of one of the bad guys in Greece, like or something.
Oh yeah. Well, no, like in DC Comics, the Suicide Squad is
Yeah.
they're all former super villains, and they are picked for this mission because they're bad guys who are willing to do what it takes. This is again, it's not the bunny unit or the teddy
Yeah.
bear unit. It is the Scorpion unit. The Memphis police chief had once been a part of the Red Dog unit in
Mhm.
Atlanta, which have been shut down for perceived murderous abuses. But that was for our very successful and important war on drugs. But everyone, this comes back to again the debate, and this is a debate that goes on. It's happening right now in major cities that the left has to be tougher on crime. Um, even though these officers who actually beat a man to death all got released on bail, and no one's saying that maybe they should have been locked up forever. Like we sort of get the fact that they are innocent until proven guilty and should be able to be released until their trial or something, and obviously not allowed to beat up any more people. But we shouldn't just throw them in jail right now. But yet none of the anti-bail reform people are complaining that they were actually given bail.
Yeah. No, they have no problem with that. It also occurred to me that, there's the fable of the scorpion and the frog, and, the scorpion kills the frog because it's his nature, which seems darkly appropriate here.
Yes.
But
Yeah, these are this is just not, no one accidentally beats up someone this horribly. I think you're someone who doesn't you hates guns, probably doesn't like having guns, but if you had a gun and someone was threatening you and you were not thinking, it is probably easy to fire a gun, like, right? The
yeah,
part of it is very removing.
it is hard
Beating
to beat
someone,
someone to death.
like there's such a human and someone begging for their life, there's a sort of, you have reached a level of sociopath that to be able to do that and not, because it's not the distance of shooting and so forth.
Yeah.
So um these guys, but these guys weren't, and no one's saying like, okay, well, maybe the screening for these guys, something went wrong, like they were all, that we got five sociopaths, not even just three who outnumbered the two good
Yeah,
cops, like
no.
all five sociopaths. So maybe the screening is a problem. That's still not something that is um occurring. And I think I've mentioned to you before, studies have shown that police officers are actually who exhibit what we would call sort of human compassion and want to restrain from hurting other people are more
Yeah.
likely to be rejected during the psychological screening because the
Yeah.
perception is that they're going to get themselves or their partner killed.
Or if they're too smart, they're worried that, they'll be they won't, they'll be anti-authoritarian. They don't want people who think and people who have compassion to be police officers. Because they got to be tough on crime. Because it makes, I
Yeah.
don't know.
There was questions as to why this video was released at all. I've already my POV is that part of it is for more so for less so for Black people, but more so for a lot of white people who need a reason as to why cops were held accountable for killing a Black
Mhm,
person. It's like, okay, this is one of those crazy progressive prosecutors and progressive um, cops. Not that this police chief is that progressive, but they're not getting out of hand. We have to show you how terrible this is, and it was hard to watch, but I think important to watch because this is what police are doing. It is almost sort of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle got many people to stop being part of a pretty vicious system
mhm,
because it was so disgusting. So I think we need to be shown, the public needs to see this and process it.
mhm.
This is what's happening for your perceived safety. Um, I think that's a false choice, but even if it
Well, no,
wasn't,
they're
you still need
basically,
to make the
at the end of the day, they are presenting it as a choice. They are presenting it as, if you like, it's an exchange. You have to put up with, this is the world that you have to live in, and this is the thing that you have to accept in order for us to give you the thing that you want, which is perceived safety. That is, it's the same thing as um, anything. It's an exchange. It's an agreement. We're willing to accept this amount of violence, this amount of bloodshed, in order to have our peace of mind, which is a false peace of mind, mind you, but that is, they're just saying this is the price that you have to pay in order to have this tough on crime thing. You can't have your tough on crime bullshit unless you kill a few people. Like that is what it is.
Yeah, and I
That
think
is, you're not getting one
any
without the other. So,
and reformers have to um I think obviously the public wasn't in the San Francisco Chelsea Bowden's corner for reform because he was recalled. But also they need to be able to fight back against this and be like, look, the police, this is what the police is going to do. If we try to implement any reforms, they
mhm,
will do you know, uh, essentially strikes
yeah.
to present that things are less safe. Um, and you need to stop believing that necessarily torturing people is the price that we is what will get you the safety you want. That's not what's going to happen.
Mhm,
And I think you need to sort of accept that this is sort of what the system is, and do you want to change it or not? And I think usually what we see is the ideas you can sort of like just tweak things, right? So
mhm.
um, it's
But
everything
this
stays the same.
Memphis actually did implement all these reforms that the reformers wanted, and this stuff still happens because the reform is not really enough.
Yeah, well, it's all superficial gloss. As you wrote, it's like the idea that cops don't want to do chokeholds, and you just need to
Yeah.
tell them not to, or give them other options, or police don't want to do that. But that's usually not, and that's just not what it is. The issue is a system of policing, especially the
Hmm.
warrior mindset, where they believe that the public is out to get them. So that doesn't,
Yeah.
that's not going to change. So when Black cops encounter a Black civilian, they still believe because we're blue, we wear the uniform, and
Hmm.
this is one of the bad people. They've internalized, they become part of that system. It's a racist system. So when Bill Maher and others are talking about, well, obviously this is an example of racism, it's very weird to me. One, because I don't necessarily recall um, even a lot of liberals overtly calling Derek Chauvin or the officer stopped Sandra Bland racist, individually racist. I think it was more of just these Sandra Bland and George Floyd and Elijah McClain and so many others are part
Mhm.
of a system where Black people are stopped for no reason,
The
are
system is
um,
working exactly as intended, and that is what is scary. Like,
or well, yes, like and if you read Jim Crow laws, things like any sort of backtalk would get you lynched, or any sort of asserting any of your rights would get you lynched.
mhm,
And that is sort of what happens here. So when the perception of talking back to police officers, or um, any sort of that behavior gets to be treated a certain way. But these traffic stops, I mean, Sandra Bland should not have been arrested. She died mysteriously, by her own hand, according to
mhm.
police reports. But we don't know. I mean, part of it is, you cover a lot of conspiracy theories. Um, Republicans are willing to believe right wingers rather, are ready to believe some of the most ridiculous conspiracy theories, but not the
Mhm.
idea that God knows what is happening when everything isn't recorded or filmed,
Yeah.
that there's a pattern of lies, the lies they told about what happened with George Floyd, that was disproven only because a young woman took video.
Mhm.
And I think there was
Because they
street
turn
camera.
their things, they turn their video off, they turn their audio off, and they go, "Oh, it's a mistake. We didn't know." You know,
Yeah, so I mean,
whoops.
for potential reform becomes really aggressively going after police unions, aggressively stating that the solution is um, uh, something larger than what we currently have, that the current
Mhm.
model isn't effective, and that is just way too much. The political price that Democrats feel they face from this is seen as too great, so
Yeah.
they usually talk about, here's, look at me, I'm a nice, moderate Democrat.
And I want to
Here's
be tough on crime too. Well,
I want to
this
be
is
tough
what
on
happens. This
crime.
is what tough on crime looks like.
I
Like,
love
I don't,
cops. I love cops.
cops are
Cops are
super
great.
great.
And occasionally one of them or five of them kills
Yeah. They're
people.
bad
And,
apples. And we
and
don't know what the whole saying is about bad apples for some reason.
yes. Well,
The
did you actually have apples?
entire saying is one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. And people are like, oh, no, they're bad apples individually and have no effect on any of the other apples in the bunch.
Yeah. There's a piece of rotten
Like, that's
fruit
not even the
amongst
whole
all your
saying.
other fruits. There's a piece of rotten fruit amongst all your other fruit, and you're like, well, everything's gonna be okay. I can walk away from this. No, 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 no. Within a couple days or even less, all your fruit's gonna be rotten because
Yeah.
the
Like,
one bad fruit. Like it's right. You as you said, like, just you can see this at home. So it's not like
yeah.
some art. It's not some
It's literally
arcane
just,
statement.
we're going to ignore, not only are we going to like ignore all this brutality, we're going to ignore the entirety of the saying that we're referencing. We can't even do idioms fully. Like, it's too much.
But yes, I mean, cops are. I've spoken to cops on the record who have said, like, if we can't stop, if we aren't doing these traffic stops, if you were to automate traffic stops, this is a terrible liberal idea that people have, because if you don't stop that, I can't catch the drug dealer, and then that drug dealer is going to kill some white lady, and oh, woe is us. So it's
So
all linked.
decriminalize drug use.
But the drug
Stop
dealer is
sending
going to.
people to prison for drugs. Stop sending people to prison for solicitation. Stop, like, just stop it. We don't need people
Oh
in
yeah,
prison for these things. And if people have drug problems, then send them to fucking rehab. We might
but
have the money for that if we weren't throwing it at cops.
but you get that entire view is sort of just counter to what is mainstream democratic belief about fighting crime, like decriminalization to a certain degree. But the idea of, you might get a Democrat to say, like, we shouldn't, but when they talk about decriminalization, often it's about the white guy
Yeah,
smoking pot
it's
in his
about white
house.
kids who smoke pot. That's where they're like, oh
But
well,
we want the means to stop people and essentially um you know regressive taxes on the poor. So here's your broken tail
Hmm.
light that's going to cost that you couldn't afford
Yeah.
to fix. Now we're going to, and you can't afford not to drive until that's fixed. And now here's another $200 that you can afford to pay. If you don't pay that, here's another $200. And now, oh, now
But
great, now you're in
Stephen,
jail. And they want to catch folks and potentially, oh, you've got drugs. Now I can put you in jail. That looks like we're tough on
mhm,
crime. Or, and they sell it as in it's that was the whole point of broken policing. If you
mhm,
catch people at this level, then they don't wind up doing some another crime. And it inevitably occurs, right? Whenever someone there's a shooting, they'll go to, oh, well, that progressive prosecutor didn't throw the book at them because they were charged for vagrancy. It's like, well,
yeah.
homelessness isn't a crime. So if you want to do crazy Minority Report stuff, fine, but that's not in any way a free society. And that is not the price that you should want to pay for freedom. And if you are in any way liberal, you should push back on it, even though the easiest thing to promise your wealthy donors and wealthy people who are more powerful, more in position to vote is to, we will put the hammer down on the people you don't see, we will contain them, and everything will be hunky dory. And you'll have a Disneyland Times Square. That's the easiest thing to do. And the hardest is to actually address the issue. And I feel like that's where there's a collective falling down.
Yeah. Well, you know, if you want to talk about crime prevention, how about not putting people in prison for pre-trial detention so that they, lose their jobs and are no longer able to like provide for themselves? That might reduce crime a little bit as well, but people like to think, oh no, that's going to make crime worse, which it literally will not do. Um, it's just people want certain things to be true and they like the idea of them being true and they don't care that they're not true. Like,
Um, we're almost at time. I'm going to tie this up with what Darren Simmons has posted here. The people putting these ideas forward do not want a free society. They want a free society for their in group and no one else. And I
yeah.
think what's so key about what you've said, Darren, is that is when there's so much backlash against African American history being taught, or specifically the 1619 Project, it's
Hmm.
because the 1619 Project exposes the idea that we've never lived in a free society by any sort of equitable
Yeah.
standpoint. When we talked about a free society, it's been one where there is freedom and democracy for an in group, in that
Hmm.
case, racially white landowners, sort of white women in a kind of very limited way, but not for enslaved people until like
Yeah.
1865, and then not for black people, kind of not really until 1965, and then still very restricted in certain ways. And that is very hard for people to confront. And
Well, it
so,
also goes back to Plato's idea of the noble lie and the way that that has actually been employed by conservative thinkers like Leo Strauss. They basically want people to believe in a lie of the nation for the purpose of creating social harmony. They don't want people to know about these things because they want people to think that America is basically good. And that, again, a few bad apples. Um, they need, they want history classes that train kids who are going to, like I said last week, grow up and serve in wars, grow up and join the police force, grow up and, do all of these things. And that's why they focus most of their energy on high school rather than college, because they don't think the college kids are going to be going into the police force and they're not going to be going into the army and they're not going to be, useful to them in that particular way. Um, but yeah, we don't. mm, I lost my train of thought, but
well, thank you, Robin. We wanted to use the full hour for this discussion of police violence, police reform. We did have something else we wish to discuss, but we're gonna actually break now and then record that later and then pop it up on the site, stream it tomorrow midday. Just because I feel like try not to
Yeah,
avoid
you're
the
probably
go
sick
more
of our
slowly
faces
episode of
by now.
that. And but thank you. As always, like, share, subscribe, check out our Patreon, and we will see you again
Yes.
next
Please
week.
give us
Take care.
money.